أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباق ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فتور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو عسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزانتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نأكل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور. ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. أمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاسبا فستعلمون كيف نذير. ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير. أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صفات ويقبضن ما يمسكهن إلا الرحمن إنه بكل شيء بصير. أمن هذا الذي هو جند لكم ينصركم من دون الرحمن إن الكافرون إلا في غرور. أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في عتو ونفور. أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم. قل هو الذي أنشأكم وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون. قل هو الذي ذرأكم في الأرض وإليه تحشرون. ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين. قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين. فلما رأوه زلفة سيئت وجوه الذين كفروا وقيل هذا الذي كنتم به تدعون. قل أرأيتم إن أهلكني الله ومن معي أو رحمنا فمن يجير الكافرين من عذاب أليم قل هو الرحمن آمنا به وإليه توكلنا فستعلمون من هو في ضلال مبين قل أرأيتم إن أصبح ماؤكم غورا فمن يأتيكم بماء معين صدق الله العظيم.
محمد و آل محمد صلوات. زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، یہ درد ہزاروں کو برسوں سے رلائے، دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، نازل نہ ہوئی کوئی بھی تم جیسی صدی کا، امت نے ستم ایسے کیے ہو گئی ضعیفہ، دل تیرے مصائب کو بلا کیسے بلائے، دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، تھوڑی سی جگہ پاس اگر بابا کے پاتی، دنیا تیرے روزے کو نہ اس طرح گراتی، رہتا نہ تیری قبر پہ یوں دھوپ کے سائے، دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، اے سید دنیا کو حیا بانٹنے والی، لوگوں نے تیری قبر پہ چادر بھی نہ ڈالی، تربت پہ شرافت ہے کھری اشک بہائے، دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے، سرکار رسالت کو بھی تم رو نہ سکی ہو، پہلو پہ یوں دروازہ زاگرہ سو نہ سکی ہو کیا کیا نہ ستم تم پہ مسلمانوں نے ڈھائے دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے وہ سامنے غاصب کے تیرا عشق بہانا ظالم کا وہ تحریر کے ٹکڑوں کو اڑانا جب سوچتا ہے کوئی نکل جاتی ہے ہائے دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے گھر لوٹ کے دربار سے جس وقت تو آئی زینب بھی تجھے سیدہ پہچان نہ پائی اللہ کسی کو بھی نہ دن ایسا دکھائے دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے امت نے تیرے گھر کا ہے دروازہ جلایا دروازہ وہ پہلو پہ تیرے ایسا گرایا پہلو سے کبھی ہاتھ نہیں تو نے اٹھائے دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے زہرا تیری تربت پہ دیا کون جلائے رحمت والے محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen in Kul Arwah al-Mu'mineen wal-Mu'minat Sawab al-Fatiha. Ayat Ma Yujibun is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Two quick announcements. The ladies circle with the Sayyid will be held for the ladies only session in the ladies hall after a quick break at the end of the program. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, ladies seniors are invited to commemorate the Shahadat of Bibi Fatemah, Salamu Alayha, at 2 p.m. Let us now invite Sayyid to come forward and recite tonight's majlis. Bar Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين، شفيع المذنبين، رحمة للعالمين، سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا، أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight on this 13th of Jamad-Ul-Awwal or Jamad-Ul-Awwal, it is one of the many dates, one of the two famous dates where we commemorate the Shahada of Our Lady of Light, Bibi Fatemah Zahra alayha salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And of course, the second most famous date is when we celebrate and commemorate the second Fatemiyah, which happens on the 3rd of Jamad-Ul-Thani. For tonight, I wanted to talk about Tasbih of Fatemah. Normally, when we talk about the Tasbih of Bibi Fatemah, we talk about it in terms of it as an act of ibadah, an act of worship, right? The benefits that one gets from it in terms of, in some narrations, it says that it's, when performed, you get more reward than, or it's equal to the reward of performing 1,000 rakats of salah. Normally, when we have the discussion about the tasbih, it's about, the sort of spiritual worship type benefits. I want to try to look at the idea of the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah from a different angle. And in fact, the angle that, inshallah, hopefully we'll look at tonight, it's actually not going to focus on the tasbih itself. It'll be a part of the discussion, but it won't actually be the main focus. Whenever we talk about the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we look at them in two different ways. One of them is when we look at each individual, right? Them as individual personalities, right? Rasulullah as himself, Imam Ali as himself, Bibi Fatemah as herself, etc. Each Imam, each person, and look at what they've accomplished, what they've done, and what they've taught us. So we look at them sometimes individually, by themselves, what they've done, what they've said, and what they've taught us. Another way that we look at them as well is not just as individuals, but we look at them in the way that they engaged with their relationships with other individuals, how they interacted with other people. And this is very specific when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt, because we have one set of narrations or historical record where we see how the Ahlul Bayt interacted with the general populace, right? That's one type. But more importantly for us, if we're looking for that ideal set of beliefs, the ideal set of actions, then for the ideal family, and the ideal behavior within a household, we turn to the holy household. Right? We turn to the Ahlul Bayt, and we look at how they interacted with one another. And it's in this light that I want to look at the Tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. And the way we're going to do that is, I'll go through the story, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, but I want to reiterate it, and I want you to try to focus, since I'm telling you ahead of time, don't simply focus on the idea of, yes, at the end of the story, we know that the Holy Prophet gives Bibi Fatemah this specific, special ibadah and dhikr. We know that part. Think about what leads up to that part of the story. Focus on that part, and then inshallah afterwards we'll analyze. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, the story of how the Tasbih of Fatemah came about, there's different narrations. I'm going to focus on one where the Rawi, the narrator, is himself Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Because, again, who better than to tell what's going on in the house than, of course, the head of the household. So, in this version of the story, Imam Ali narrates that once I saw the great troubles and the difficulties that my wife, Fatemah Zahra, was going through in terms of her household duties, right? All of her chores. And in other narrations, we get pretty much the context clues, right? They say that from grinding the wheat, her hands had been cut up and they were bloodied. She had marks. She was tired from carrying water from place to place, right? So she had these physical marks on her and signs of, distress and of engaging in all this type of work. And then he says, also, Imam Ali saying, I had been given information that Muslims had recently won a battle somewhere, and there had been some captives taken. So there were some captives that were brought to the Muslims' lands as spoils of war. So he then comes to his wife, Bibi Fatemah. He says, given the situation of how she's overexerted herself in the house, he says, why don't you go to your father and ask him for somebody, a khadim, a helper, to help out with some of these household chores, right? So that some of this burden can be relieved from you, right? And you don't have to spend as much effort or energy in all these different tasks. You can delegate some of these things. So Bibi Fatemah then goes to the house of Rasulullah, and when she goes there, so says her salam, she notices that Rasulullah is sitting with a group of individuals. And he's engaged in some important business, some tabligh effort or something like that, right? And when she notices this, she immediately just leaves. She's like, I don't want to bother him, so she goes back home. Rasulullah, of course, had noticed this. So the next day, he himself comes to the house of Ali and Fatemah, right? And when he gets there, he says, I noticed that you came to my house yesterday, and I could tell something was on your mind, something important. So tell me what's going on. Initially, Bibi Fatemah was a bit hesitant. She didn't want to initially say it, right? She felt a little shy. But eventually she says, there's a lot of duties in the house. The work that I have to do in the house, it's a lot, right? I have to bring water, right, from the well, from outside. I have to bring it inside. I have to make wheat, meaning I have to go either buy the wheat or grab it, put it in this grinder and, make flour. I have to sweep the whole house. And she starts enumerating all these things. I have to take care of all of this. When Rasulullah hears all of this, immediately he shows signs of distress. Right? He, shows signs that, he doesn't like to hear something like this. No father ever wants to hear that his daughter is in such a state. So Bibi Fatemah continued, said, look, so I came yesterday to see if maybe you could send, a servant, a maidservant, a helper to the house so that I might be able to, delegate some of these affairs to them, right? Some of these household chores, they could take care of it. And this is where now we come to the end of the story, right? Rasulullah then responds and says, wouldn't you rather I give you something, a khadim, something that's helpful, more so than what you want? She says, yes, of course. Ya Rasulullah, tell me, what is it? What's better than this? And this is where he begins to instruct her on this specific dhikr of reciting takbir, right? Allahu Akbar 34 times, Alhamdulillah 33 times, and Subhanallah 33 times, right? So this specific tasbih of Fatemah that we have recited. And then from other narrations, we learn the different manners of how to do it, right? So after every salah, specifically the wajib salawat, we recite it there. And also it's been narrated before you go to sleep, it's also something recommended to recite. So that's pretty much the story. And I'm sure most of you have heard it. Now I want to go back and focus on a few different points of these. Of course, initially when we're hearing it, it's a dhikr. And in riwayat, we're taught that this is the greatest dhikr that's been taught. There is no greater ibadah. For example, we have one hadith which comes from our fifth Imam, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. He's reported to have said, مَا عُبِدَ اللَّهِ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ التَّحْمِيدِ أَفْضَلْ مِنْ تَسْبِيحِ فَاطِمَةٍ. There is no way, there's nothing that can be a tool to worship Allah, to praise Allah. There's nothing greater than the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. There's no way you can worship somebody, you can worship Allah greater than through the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. And then he gives his proof. He says, وَلَوْ كَانَ شَيْءٌ أَفْضَلْ مِنْهُ. If there was something better, if there's any dhikr, any ibadah, any way to get to Allah, if there's any better way, لَنَحَلَ Rasulullah Fatemah. If there was going to be a better way to get towards Allah, if there was going to be a better dhikr and source of ibadah, definitely Rasulullah would have taught it to Bibi Fatemah before anybody else. So interestingly, his proof for why this is the best ibadah is that the best abid is actually Bibi Fatemah. This is another sort of secret instruction that he's giving. The greatest worshipper is Bibi Fatemah, and she has the greatest tool at her disposal. If there was going to be a better tool, then Rasulullah would have taught it to her. And this is why normally when we talk about the tasbih, we talk about it in this term, right? It's, the greatest thing, you get all these rewards, and, if you do it, it'll help you doing X, Y, Z. That's normally how we have the discussion. But what's actually, I think, maybe even more interesting, or at least equally interesting, is those events that led up to Bibi Fatemah actually requesting something from Rasulullah in the first place. So now I want to go piece by piece and analyze this story. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So I want you to, in a sense, think of this whole episode and this story like, the way that certain directors, the way that they have movies, normally when we're watching a movie, we're literally in the third person just watching random events. In certain, TV series or movies, sometimes what they'll do is they'll narrate the story, but from the point of view of different characters, and they'll show the same thing over and over again, but from various different points of view, right? Like, from example, there's some recent ones, but, one that won awards a while ago was Crash, right? That was a famous one, where it looked at the same exact story, but from the different perspectives of individuals, right? That all played a part in that story. If you look at this story of how Bibi Fatemah acquired the tasbih, the same way we can look at it from different points of view. We start with, for example, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and then we're going to jump to Bibi Fatemah and Rasulullah. That's how we're going to, move along like this. So look, the story begins, again, with the narrator, with the main sort of figure in the story, who is Imam Ali. He here is playing the role of a wali, of a husband. Now, what is he doing here? Now, so the first point is where us fathers, husbands, should pay attention. When we think of our duties, our wajib duties, as caretakers, as providers, as maintainers, as is addressed in the Quran, right? In Surah An-Nisa, Ar-Rijal Qawwamuna ala Nisa, right? That men are entrusted with a specific duty to maintain, protect, and take care of women, right? This is a commandment which has wajib implications and mustahab implications as well. Normally when we think about this, we say, yeah, I am providing a house, meaning there's a roof on your head, I'm giving you clothing, and I'm giving you food, right? This is it. What else do you want, right? And that's, once we provided that, we feel like our duty is done. In this story, if you look at in the beginning, you see that Imam Ali perhaps is giving us that and teaching us as the awliya, the walis of our households, that we have to go beyond just providing the sort of bare necessities in a household. What is he showing? Well, he is the one who is noticing that Bibi Fatemah is in distress. Bibi Fatemah herself is actually not coming to him in this version of the narration. Imam Ali is the one who's noticing that Bibi Fatemah is going through a lot of trouble at home. Imam Ali, as a wali, is aware of exactly what's going on in his own household. He is aware of not just the financial budgetary needs of a household, right? Again, providing the actual house and clothing and food and all that. He's actually maintaining and protecting the spiritual well-being of everybody in his house, as every husband and wali should be doing as well. And we know, of course, that spiritual well-being is inextricably tied to physical well-being. It's very, very difficult to elevate spiritually if your physical is not taken care of, right? If a person is worried about, again, food and shelter, right, paying rent, paying their mortgage, they're worried about all these things, it's very tough then to, for example, come to programs at the center sometimes because you have to work overtime, or you have to take an extra job, or you have to stay late for a project. If you're worried about, where is your next paycheck going to come from, it might be difficult then to wake up for Salatul Layl, or to take extra time to read a book or watch a lecture for spiritual building. Our major concerns are sometimes just about our survival, and rightly so, right? We have to survive physically in order for us to thrive spiritually. So Imam Ali, as a wali, is showing us, don't just provide the bare necessities. If you yourself and you want your family to spiritually grow, you have to make sure all the variables and elements are in line and in place. So when he sees that his wife is in distress, he says, okay, now I have to make sure that I take care of this. We as fathers, as husbands, need to be aware of the mental, physical, and emotional conditions of every single person in our household. We have to go out of our way to do that. Sometimes they won't express that. Sometimes they will have that sabr and hide it from us. Our job is to be extra hyper-aware and to figure out what's going on in our households. This also now, from the other side, a question that women would have to think about is, do women, wives, mothers, should they be trying to do it all and be it all as sort of the modern day Muslim or Muslimah, as they say, do everything. Be, the best mother, be the best wife, be the best in the corporate world, right? Highly educated, be involved in the community. Are all of those things part and parcel and necessary for a woman? Are there certain priorities that they can start cutting down to make way and make room for something else? That's something that, for those sisters who are interested, that's something that we'll discuss more in detail in the sister circle after the main program tonight. But over here, what we're seeing is that Bibi Fatemah is struggling with her household duties. Again, physically. She's not complaining about it, but she's struggling. Imam Ali is the one who takes the necessary steps and tells Bibi Fatemah that, no, you need to go, and here's a solution for you. Let's go to the next point. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So he offers her a solution. Now, let's think about this right now in the modern world. Those of us in our households, if, let's say, we were to hear from our wives, right, or somebody was to hear from their mother, or the person who's, let's say, doing a traditional breakdown of the house where they're doing the household stuff, right, cooking, cleaning, etc., and maintaining the house. If they say, or we see that the workload is too much for them, what is usually the response, or what way do people react to that, right? If a woman, again, given a traditional household, if there's a lot of work for her to do, it's too much for her to handle, what is normally the solution that's offered? And that's discussed in the kind of mainstream discourse. It's usually, okay, well, that means the husband needs to step up, right? If the woman can do it all, she shouldn't do it all, everything should be 50-50, well, then the man needs to step up and do what he has to do as well. The woman shouldn't have to cook all the time or clean all the time, especially if there's way too much for her to do, and then be expected to also take care of the kids and handle homework and all that other stuff. Well, most people nowadays would say, okay, the man needs to step forward. Where's the husband? Where's the father? He needs to come forward, and they have to do, split it 50-50. That is a modern household. Now, my question for all those sort of modern progressive type thinkers is, okay, what would you say to Imam Ali there? When this same situation arises in the household, he doesn't come forward and say, oh, Fatemah, I don't like to see you like this. Hey, let me come help out. He doesn't offer that. He's actually outsourcing it. He says, go ask your dad for some help. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? And he doesn't actually say, go ask your dad for help. And literally says, go ask your dad for one of these, servants or, captives of war that have come. He asked for help from a khadim. It's a very, very strange sort of dynamic there, right? If you think about it. He's not offering his own assistance. He's saying, no, you should go. My advice is go talk to your father. He's using the information that he has available too, which is our next point as well. In addition to having knowledge and awareness about what's going on inside our homes, right, of how our kids are doing, their emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, and their condition, in addition to being aware of that, we also need to, in order to take care of our household, we have to be aware of what's going on around the world, in society, politics, economics, all of this. If Imam Ali did not know that there was a recent war where the Muslims had won and they had taken these war captives and there were these extra servants that were going to be available, he would not have thought of the idea for her to go and ask Rasulullah for one of these extra servants to help out in the house. Because of his outside awareness, we would call an economic opportunity, although I don't know how many people would describe slavery as an economic opportunity, but let's leave that controversial discussion aside for now. But he's aware of what's going on. He uses that information, he sees an opportunity, and he advises his wife to go and seize that opportunity. Right now, a lot of complaints that we have, and again, it is tough for a lot of families right now given the economic situation. A lot of people cave under that pressure. A lot of people cannot handle the sort of economic burdens that exist right now in this society. And maybe it wasn't something that just happened because of COVID, maybe even before COVID. It's tough to live in this country. It's not easy, right? We don't have the same sort of social, welfare programs that other, let's say, socialist countries may have. So things here, from one perspective, may be much more difficult, right? Healthcare will be a lot more for a lot of individuals. So given that, it's almost wajib. When I say wajib, I'm not meaning like Tawzi al-Masail, Ayatul Sistani wajib. That's not what I mean. I mean practically, it's wajib for every wali, for every husband, for every father to understand what's going on in society. If that means following, again, I don't like to talk about investment opportunities and crypto and all that, but for example, if that means knowing what opportunities are ripe and it's there, so that as an individual who needs to take care of my family and afford them all the luxuries that they deserve, that means I need to keep aware and be aware of what's going on there. If I don't know what's going on in the world, if I'm just sheltering myself off and saying, I'll just stick to the bare minimum of work and I'll let my family suffer for it, I'm not doing my job as a wali. I'm not doing my job as a husband, and I'm not doing my job as a father. My job is to make sure the spiritual well-being of the household is not the bare minimum, but they're allowed to thrive to their maximum potential. And that's only going to happen if they have that mental, emotional, and spiritual space to do so. If that means, very practically speaking, right now, we see in our households, people are struggling. Women are struggling with the amount of household work that is there. If that means we have to use knowledge or gain the knowledge in terms of budgeting and investment and financial planning, whatever it is, to figure out, I got to take out from this, invest more here, do whatever it takes, so that I can get extra help for my wife around the house, well, that's your job as a wali. Our women shouldn't have to sacrifice their time, their patience, their spiritual well-being, because we're unable to budget things accordingly. This is a duty that Allah has put on our shoulders, not their shoulders. And if that burden is coming on their shoulders, then we may be responsible for something like this on the Day of Judgment. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So in addition to being aware of the situation in our households, of what's going on, what's the emotional, physical, spiritual well-being and status of people in the house, we also need to be aware of what's going on outside. What are the economic opportunities? Allah has provided rizq. I just need to go out and find out what that is. I can't sit around doing nothing. If my rizq is written and Allah does not want us to be impoverished, there's going to be something out there for me. I can't sit around idly. And alhamdulillah, it was a great initiative that CBE had undertaken by providing this business education forum, right? In the past few weeks, where things like personal financial investments and opportunities were discussed. The status and what was going on in the real estate market was discussed. Having an understanding of what Islamic economics in a large scale and a small scale and community scale, what does it actually mean? We discuss these things, right? As a community, we need to figure these things out. And instead of competing with one another to try to, increase our wealth, we should be cooperating with one another. It's nice that, for example, in the weekly, we have a fiqh corner, right? So we have all that stuff, which is wonderful, right? We need to know our basic ahkam. That's good. Wouldn't it be nice, for example, if there was, I'm not advocating this, I'm just giving it as an example, if there was, like a stock tip of the week in the weekly. I know that it would be terrible because if somebody gives the wrong tip, then they're going to be the one to blame, right? But for example, a lot of times, what you hear is somebody has an economic opportunity or investment tip, and they hide it from everybody because they don't want everybody else to jump on it. It's people on the outside, in the outside world, right? And I'm sure many of you have signed up for all these, whether it's a Discord channel or on a certain, like a subreddit, wherever it is, and you're getting all this information, buy all this or sell all this, whatever it happens to be. I'm not into this stuff, so I don't know, but I have some idea. It's sad in a way that we have to go to outsiders to get this information when there's a good amount of experts within the community that we could be utilizing. And if we all had that wealth shared amongst all of us, then we wouldn't have to constantly come with fundraising and asking and doing all this because everybody would be, so incredibly wealthy that they'd be looking for more and more opportunities just to give it away. Right? Inshallah, hopefully we get to a status like that where we have more money than we can even think about how to deal with and we're just giving it out constantly. And we can finally then move away from giving it in our own community to other communities. It would be nice to move to that ideal one day, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So this was the first point of view and perspective of this sort of narration of tasbih, is looking at Imam Ali's role and his point of view and perspective in this story. Now we jump to the sort of main players and main characters, namely, of course, Bibi Fatemah and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention a few of these points. I won't open them up in detail. When we look at initially Bibi Fatemah's role, in this version of the narration, as I mentioned previously before, she actually didn't complain on her own to Imam Ali. Now, I'm not saying that you can't express women shouldn't express their issues to their husbands. They should. But it's interesting that she doesn't just come outright and complain, or as sometimes we say, nag about certain issues that may be going on, right? She's, in a sense, trying her best to be patient and figure out what to do in this situation. In other versions of the narration, she actually does come forward and tell, Imam Ali that, look, this is the situation I'm dealing with in the house. But she doesn't complain about it necessarily. She doesn't nag. She expresses a need that she has, and she has trust and faith in her wali, in her imam, in her husband, in that father of their children, that I'm just going to express the need and he'll take care of whatever it is. And I trust his wisdom. Imagine if we had this kind of relationship in our households. Then she makes her way, again, once Imam Ali gives the advice, in a sense, no questions asked, she immediately goes and follows with that advice. She goes to the house of Rasulullah right away. She goes to the house of her father. When she sees that he's in the middle of some work, doing some tabligh effort, we don't have the details there, but he was involved in something. She doesn't interrupt. She has her own needs. She has her own, advice, or we could even say command from her own wali, but she sees that, look, the other wali, Rasulullah, is engaged in greater community work. Perhaps a point of reflection over here is, it's interesting how Bibi Fatemah, in that moment, she perhaps is seeing that, look, I have my own needs to take care of. I have my own house to take care of, but I also see that there's a greater Islamic mission happening right now too. That the ummah at large also has its own set of needs. Perhaps right now, my needs are superseded and overridden by what the needs of the Islamic ummah are. So I can wait a little bit, it's not a big deal. Sometimes we come to we have our own issues and we come and we give advice and we, give suggestions to how a program should run. That's wonderful. But you have to keep in mind that as we are giving, hopefully it's friendly advice and, friendly, nice comments and suggestions and feedback, that look, you are one out of hundreds and hundreds of families and individuals that exist and come to these communities. Your one perspective on how things should run can easily be overshadowed by the hundreds of other individuals that are here. If you didn't like something or you did like something, that doesn't mean you get to speak on behalf of everybody else. There is a general need for the community, and sometimes that will supersede your individual need of what you think might be best for the community. You might think that everybody needs to stick to the ideal, mustahabat, all the time. We need to make sure no makruh is being done. Well, that's an ideal, sure. But maybe the community as a whole is not ready for that. And maybe the mustahabat and makruhat are pushing them away. And we know that, we've seen that. We've mentioned this in previous sessions, that when individuals have pushed Muslims too far It pushes them away from Islam in the first place. They said, look, your religion is for people who are bekar, who have nothing else to do. I don't want this. I'm not a useless person. I have other things to do in my life. And from the words of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, the Ahlul Bayt lightly encourage individuals to grow step by step, baby steps. Let's try little by little, right? Keep away from haram. You did all that? Wonderful. Let's start working on your wajibat. You got that? Okay, great. Now maybe a few mustahabat here and there, right? Little by little, over a lifetime span is how they're working on individuals. Not demanding every single thing all at once from somebody. Make sure you get all this wajibat perfectly. Follow all the ahkam. Now do all this mustahabat and pronounce it perfectly. And all that thing's makruh, don't do that. And this, we can't demand everything all at once. It's not going to work. Remember, he said that the way of sort of this bullying and pushing so much on individuals is the way of the Umayyads. He said, we don't go by this way. We are light, we are tolerant, we are lenient and encouraging in the path that we follow. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now let's jump to the point of view of Rasulullah himself. We see that in his session, as he's engaging in this, whatever he was doing with this group, when he notices that his daughter's coming to him, he immediately, right, the next day he goes to the house of Fatemah and Ali right away. Even though Bibi Fatemah didn't say anything, he says, okay, when my daughter's coming to me, there's some need there. I need to go and take care of it right away. Right away we can see from this part of the story, the relationship between this father and this daughter, or any relationship between a father and child should always be like this, even after marriage. Bibi Fatemah is in a place where even after marriage, she's still able to go and ask her needs from her father. And at the same point, Rasulullah is also going and making sure the needs of his children are being taken care of after marriage as well. Sometimes we go to two different extremes, where the children say, look, mom, dad, mama, baba, keep away, let us handle everything. And sometimes, again, from the parents' perspective, I don't want to get involved in your lives, you guys take care of it, right? Sometimes people marry off their daughters and they tell the son-in-law, listen, this is your job now. I'm not giving you a dime. I'm taking care of you guys. If you fail, that's your own fault. This is not cooperation. This is not real wilaya. Just because your daughter has now moved on to somebody else's wilaya doesn't mean that all of a sudden now she's still not, a part of your heart. It doesn't mean that some of your risk still can't be allotted to them. And you see that when Bibi Fatemah is asking Rasulullah for something, she asks her father, says, look, I need help at home. Give me the servant. His response is, okay, fine, I'll give you that. He actually says, no, I'm going to give you something better. Imagine now, again, an example where a daughter comes to a father, right? Again, after marriage. Or maybe even another way. Imagine, again, from a different perspective, you as a husband, can you ever imagine telling your wife, hey, can you go ask, your father for this? Can you understand the dynamic of this household where they are free to communicate with one another like this? And how sometimes the relationship between husband and wife is not really that solid. There is no communication. The relationship between, son and the children and parents after marriage is also not that sound, where they can ask for things. Or between the husband, wife in terms of the in-laws, right? That, can you ever imagine saying, look, go ask your dad for a loan? Can you ever imagine? It's a scary thing to think about, right? Somebody might not be doing financially well, and they know that, their in-laws are doing well. Imagine saying, hey, go ask your dad for a loan, or go ask your mom for this. That's a very, very tough position to be in. But this household is so secure in their communication and expressing their needs. They're setting an ideal for us that, look, Imam Ali is telling his wife, I see your needs. This is my advice to you. Go ask your father. There should be no issue. She goes and she makes the request. Rasulullah comes and doesn't just grant the request, but says, look, let me give you something better than that. And this should be, again, an example for us who are in these positions. When somebody comes for a request, especially if it's your own children, or if it's your children-in-law, you should always try to go one step further. Say, look, if they ask me for this, let me see how I can, make them independent in this regard too. How can I take them a step higher than that? How can I go beyond that means? And this should be in everything, right? If somebody we know is in need in the community, if they ask for, I need $100, okay, $100 is great. That takes care of them temporarily. It's a bandage solution. If we offer something which makes them independent, or we give them double or triple that amount, then that gives them something much more than they've asked for. which we know is recommended. So of course, that principle should be applied to our own children or our own in-laws, right? And this is an example that we see there. Now, something, again, that I'd like for you to all think about is this. And this is our final point. Does the response and answer of Rasulullah, does what he offers to Bibi Fatemah, does it match the request that she has? She comes to Rasulullah, she comes to her father saying, the household chores are too much. Look at my hands. They're cut up, they're bloody. My back is broken from carrying water. This is too much for me. I need help in the house. I need, a maid or I need somebody else to help out with household work. So naturally, you would expect the response to say, okay, I'll send somebody there. Or I'll find a Sahaba to come help, or something like that. His response is, I'll give you something better. She says, okay. You would expect that the better response should be, instead of one person, I'll give you 2 people, or 5 people, or a whole team. It's not that. Rasulullah gives her a dhikr, a set of recitations that she's supposed to recite. So, okay. Now again, we all know that, this ibadat is great, but what does that actually have to do with her need? Is her reciting it going to take away her duties of sweeping the floor, of taking care of, her 4 children, her duties of, preparing things in the household? Are the duties going to stop all of a sudden? Is the pain from, her hands going to be, taken away? Like, what exactly is coming from this tasbih of Fatemah? Perhaps, according to some ulama, the idea here is this. And imagine if, let's say, you came to me and said, Hasan, we're moving to another house, and we've got a dresser or a drawer or something heavy to move. Can you come help out and move it? I said, yeah, sure. So I come that day, and as we were both about to lift it, I stop and say, well, I'm not going to lift it for you, but just recite La hawla wa la quwwata 10 times and you'll be okay, inshallah. You'd be like, these Mulanas, man, what's wrong? You would laugh. What kind of joke is this? I need your physical help. Bibi Fatemah saying, I need help at home, and Rasulullah saying, I'll give you something better. Here's a dhikr for you. Again, it seems very strange. It's only going to seem strange to us if we don't have an understanding of how the metaphysical is connected to the physical world. If we don't understand how all this ibadat, all this azkar, all these recitations that we do, how they relate and come down and affect us in this physical world. And I've mentioned this many times before. This is one of the problems that we hear sometimes when it comes to, these discussions about, mental health. That people have only relegated it to physical issues. Right? The example they always give is, when you have a headache, are you just going to make dua, or are you going to go take a Tylenol? Or whatever, medicine you want to take. We'll say, do both. Rasulullah is not offering both here. He's not saying, okay, I'll send a servant, but I'm also going to give you a dhikr. He only says, I'm going to give you this specific tasbih that's better than any other ibadah that you've ever known before. And now this ibadah is a core for us as Muslims. Not the Shias, but Sunnis as well. Right? Because this is also very well known in their narrations too. How in the world can something like this have so much power? There's a lot to discuss. I want to just give you something to think about through this narration of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. I'll recite it. I want you to think about it, and perhaps in another session we'll open it up a little bit more. So I'll skip the Arabic as well. So Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam is meant, he's teaching his companions about the value of the tasbih, and he's telling his companions, we order our children to recite this tasbih of Bibi Fatemah in the same way that we command them to recite their salah as well. Now again, we've talked about tarbiyah before. It doesn't mean you grab a 3-year-old and start forcing them to recite it. All right? Now, I'm not going to give you the tarbiyah discussion. We've talked about that before. But keeping in mind the tarbiyah principles that the Ahlul Bayt have left down in the 0 to 7 phase. But the last part is the interesting one. He says, if you should be recommending or ordering your children or disciplining them and getting them used to reciting the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah in the same way that we order our children. And then this last part, if you don't do that, then you are inviting suffering and misery in your life. He says, فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يُلْزِمْهُ عَبْدٌ فَشَقِي. If you don't do that, you'll be this miserable individual. You'll suffer in your life. There's some connection here in terms of our physical suffering. the physical trials and tribulations that we deal with, and the recitation of the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. Again, I want you just to think about it, inshallah, because there's way too much to open up. We could have had a whole lecture about just this point itself. Perhaps many times maybe you have skipped tasbih, maybe once or twice. Have you ever actually reflected and thought about how your day has been after that? How you have felt after that? You know how sometimes when either you delay Fajr or miss Fajr, sometimes that feeling you get afterwards, you feel a little disgusted and your day just doesn't work the way it should. The Imam is saying that the importance of tasbih is basically no different. That physically there's going to be suffering and misery in your life if you do not pay attention to this tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. Which leads us to believe that, again, there's many ideas over here, that in terms of even physical needs that we have in the dunya, it can be solved through reciting the tasbih of Bibi Fatemah. Now again, this may be very difficult for some people to fathom and to swallow. That, for example, for a woman who, let's say, is overcome by household duties. Imagine if Rasulullah had come to you and said, instead of, getting a cleaner to come every month or whatever, just recite this tasbih. Perhaps this is also showing the relationship, specifically for the women as well, that they need to have with their ibadah and their connection to Allah, and how it would help them in their physical life in terms of their duties as women, as mothers, and as wives, and as these individuals who are trying to manifest the qualities of Allah as manifested by Bibi Fatemah. Think about these things, inshallah. If we have any other opportunities, maybe we might open it up more in depth, especially if we have time in the sister circle after this main session, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We talked about the value of the household. That this household, this holy household, in addition to teaching us forms of ibadah, our rules and regulations, the best ideals and morals and akhlaq, even in their lives and their interactions with one another, they're leaving behind legacies of how to manifest and act as the perfect household in our life right now as well. As we saw in this story, even in the way that Bibi Fatemah was taught the greatest ibadah, the tasbih, that story itself is showing us the relationships between different individuals in an ideal household, between father and son, in-laws, and all these things. One other lesson that we also learn from the Ahlul Bayt is also the lesson of grief as well. Because in addition to learning and teaching and instructing and guiding us, the Shias, they've also laid down the principles of grieving, of crying, of lamenting, of performing azadari. And we also see that within their households, they also grieved together, they mourned together. And there was nothing more difficult for the household of the Ahlul Bayt than that janazah, and especially the final moments that they had with their beloved Fatemah. Can you imagine right now a father looking at the body of his beloved wife, his young wife, laying there on this table as he's beginning to form the ghusl? And the ulama describe it like this. They say, just put yourself in the perspective of a father who's looking at his wife like this, and he looks at his 4 children, none of whom are over the age of 10. They're all younger than 10 years old. And they say that perhaps this might have been the moment where Imam Ali, now, not just as a father, but as an Imam, now is also going to teach his young children how to perform the ghusl. He's perhaps tells Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein, bring me some water, let me show you what you're supposed to do in terms of performing ghusl. Should any young child learn how to perform ghusl on their young mother like this? Should any young child have to learn like this? Should the one who's going to be deprived from water in Karbala, should he be the one who brings water to his father? Baba, I've brought you some water to wash our mother's body with. Perhaps maybe Imam Ali is telling Bibi Zainab and Kulthum, bring me the coffin so we can cover your mother. This is the same Bibi Zainab who will be looking for a coffin for her brother on the day of Ashura. This is the same Bibi Zainab who in the future will be pulling out the arrows from the body of her brother Imam Hasan. This is the grief and the sorrow that all of these individuals are going through. This is the same Kulthum, is how she is watching the coffin being placed on the body of her mother. This is the same Kulthum who will have her chador and her hijab hijab taken away from her on the night of Sham-e Ghariba. And as they are watching all of this, this same household who has instructed us and told us over and over again, when you think of our Abba Abdullah, when you think of Imam Hussein, cry and raise your voices, show people that you have love and grief in your heart for the household of the Ahlul Bayt, especially for Imam Hussein and the Shahadat. This is the same household who are gharib in Medina, in the same place where they were born and raised and where they were brought up and where Islam was there, the holy household was there. This is the same place where Imam Ali has to tell his children, lower your voices and do not cry out loud. These same individuals in Medina are the ones who are telling us, your cries are too loud, Fatemah. We don't want to hear your cries anymore. These same people have betrayed Rasulullah. They are betraying Fatemah. They betrayed Ali. And now Imam Ali has to tell his children, lower your voice. But even Imam Ali, he can't keep his own promise. He can't obey his own order as he moves his hand over the body of Fatemah performing the ghusl, and he bangs his head on a wall saying, Ya Fatemah, what have you hidden for me? The children are saying, Baba, you told us that we have to lower our voices and we shouldn't cry. Why are you crying now out loud? He said, if only you had felt what I had felt, if only you knew what your mother had hid from us, you would have been crying just like I'm crying right now. لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اڑاؤ خاک آزاداروں کے زہرا دا نہ ہوتی ہے اڑاؤ خاک آزاداروں کے زہرا دا ہوتی ہے چلو شالے ازاؤ رے کھلے سر آج مدینے میں دو مٹھی خاک آزاداروں کے زہرا دا نہ ہوتی ہے اڑاؤ آزاداروں کے زہرا دا نہ ہوتی ہے کہاں ہے درے کرار نے کوئی ذرا جا کر سنا دے محمد کو کہ زہرا دا نہ ہوتی ہے اڑاؤ آزاداروں کے زہرا دا نہ ہوتی ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے کیا حال یہ امت نے زہرا کا بنایا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ جاب پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے خاتون کوئی غم سے یوں چور نہیں دیکھی ایسی کوئی دنیا میں مستور نہیں دیکھی 18 برس میں ہی لگتی تو ضعیفہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے دربار میں ظالم نے کی سی پذیرائی کس طرح سے تو بی بی پھر لوٹ کے گھر آئی بالوں کی سفیدی نے سب حال سنایا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے غربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے غربت بھی شکستہ ہے تو روتی رہی گھر میں حیدر سے بھی چھپ چھپ کے عصمت کی طرح دکھ بھی پردے میں رہے تیرے کچھ درد تیرے بی بس جانتی فضا ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے سین تربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے تربت بھی شکستہ ہے دو ایسے جنازے ہیں تاریخ میں جو اٹھے بس گھر کے ہی لوگوں نے دونوں کو دیے کاندھے ایک فاطمہ زہرا ہے ایک بالی سکینہ ہے پہلو شکستہ ہے غربت شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے غربت بھی شکستہ ہے پہلو بھی شکستہ ہے غربت بھی شکستہ ہے
آل مصطفیٰ پہ ظلم یہ جفا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا آل مصطفیٰ جفا قبر تک نہیں ایک جا ہوئی کوئی ہے نجف شام میں کوئی قبر تک نہیں ایک جا ہوئی کوئی ہے نجف شام میں کوئی کاظمین یوں جدا جدا آل مصطفیٰ پہ ظلم یہ جفا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا آل مصطفیٰ پہ ظلم جس کو کہ نبی بضعۃ منی اس کا گھر جلے آہ مومنی جس کو کہ نبی بضعۃ منی اس کا گھر جلے آہ مومنین در کا در گرا درہ تک لگا آل مصطفیٰ پہ ظلم یہ جفا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا آل ظلم جس کی شان میں ہو سور حل عطا بے گزا رہے وا مصیبتا جس کی شان میں ہو سور حل عطا بے گزا رہے وا مصیبتا پانی تک نہ دے اس کو بے خطا آل مصطفیٰ پہ ظلم یہ جفا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا وا محمدا وا مصیبتا آل مصطفیٰ زلزلے میں ہو کیوں نہ نینوا کیوں نہ न फिर हिले दश्ते करबला ज़लज़ले में हो क्यों न नई नवा क्यों न फिर हिले दश्ते करबला आए फौज की छीन ली रिदा आले मुस्तफ़ा पे जुल्म ये जफा वा मुहम्मदा वा मुसीबता वा मुहम्मदा वा मुसीबता आले मुस्तफ़ा पे जुल्म ये जफा
Surah Al-Mubarakah Al-Fatiha.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولاي يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان أجر الله تعالى فرجك وسهر الله مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم كن لوليك حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها طويلا